Today we are finishing up a 4-week conversation about happiness, and we've been talking about it. That means next week we're going to stop talking about happiness and we're going back to like boring, unhappy sermons. Thank you for laughing. I didn't know how that joke would go over. I'm kind of half joking, though, because next weekend, or this week, I should say, on Wednesday, we're beginning a time in the church called Lent, L-E-N-T, which is not the stuff that my wife tells me I'm supposed to get out of the dryer, but I never do. But so Lent is the 40 days that leads up to Easter, not including Sundays. That's why the math works. And it's a season from about the 4th century that the church says this should be a time of preparing ourselves to celebrate the miracle of Easter. It's a time of intentionality and just recognizing that so often we get sidetracked, but it's an invitation to be intentional about God's presence. It's always around us. So I'm super excited. We have a bunch of things that we're doing during Lent. We have daily devotionals, studying from Mark 9, I think 51 through the Passion Week, the death and resurrection of Jesus. We're going to read that. Wednesday, we're going to have right here ashes from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. that you can come in, receive ashes, take a moment to pray, to stop, to pause, to contemplate who we are and who God is. We're going to have a Facebook devotional live at 9:30 a.m., Ash Wednesday devotional. And then at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, we're going to have a service right here. And I invite you, whatever that looks like for you, to be intentional about that. So that starts next week. This week, we're finishing up happiness, and as I mentioned, a lot of this content comes from a United Methodist pastor here in St. Louis, Matt Miofsky, who wrote a book about happiness. Some of it I've taken from another pastor, Andy Stanley, and some of this I took from a guy named Jesus, who I want to start with today, because Jesus said one of my favorite verses, and I have a lot of favorite verses, don't get me wrong, but this is one of them. John 10:10, Jesus said, "The thief comes or enters only to steal, kill, and destroy." Now, for years, whenever I read that verse, I just assumed things, and I assumed whenever you hear the word thief, who do you think Jesus is talking about? Satan, right? Could it be Satan? Good 80s callback. We think about it like, and I have no doubt there is an evil one. I have no doubt that Satan, the evil one, does try to steal, kill, and destroy. But I also know, if I'm really honest, in my life, the person who has the greatest potential to steal my happiness, to kill my relationships, or destroy my life, it isn't Satan, is it? Who has the greatest potential to do that? Me, right? I am perfectly competent in ruining my life without any help from Satan, right? I am perfectly, and I know that. And I wonder if Jesus knew that. And I wonder if sometimes we want to blame it. Well, Satan made me do this. And God's like, no, I think you chose to do that all on yourself, right? And I just wonder if sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. Right? We know this. You know how I know this? Because Satan isn't the one who bought it. We bought it. We're the one who leased it. We're the ones who ate it. We're the ones who drank it. We're the ones who smoked it. We're the ones who dated it. And some of us, we're the ones who married it. Right? We are more than capable of making our own worst decisions if we're not. And Jesus knows that. And so whenever he said, the thief, I wonder if he's not talking about Satan. I wonder if he's talking about me. And I wonder if he's talking about you. The thief enters only to steal, kill, and destroy. But there's a second half of that verse. But Jesus came so that they, who's they? That they is we, so that we could have life. And I love this. So that we could have life to the fullest. to the overflowingness, to the abundance, to the extravagance, to the happiness. Doesn't that sound like a happy life? Doesn't it sound like Jesus said, hey, I know, Mike, you have potential to ruin your life. And then maybe there's somebody else who will tempt you to do that. But Jesus came to give us an abundant, happy, overflowing life. And so that's what we've been talking about during this sermon series. What does that look like? And how is it that Jesus invites us to live a life that God created us for and yet we don't always live into? And so they're not rocket science type things, but just a one-sentence recap. Week 1, if you were here, and by the way, you can go back and listen to them online, catch up on our website, on the app, on social media, on YouTube. But week 1, we talked about no thing will make us happy, because happiness isn't about stuff. Happiness is found in relationships. We talked all about that. Week 2, since happiness is about relationships, it's not, people won't make us happy unless we learn the practice of forgiveness. Because we can't control what they do, we can only control ourselves. So we talked about that. Week 3, last week, we talked about that happiness isn't out there somewhere that we have to chase after, we have to pursue, we have to look for. Happiness is right where we are if we're willing to turn our focus and attention to the contentment of what we have been given and where we are right now. The happiness isn't out there, happiness is right here if we choose to see it and receive it. And so this week we're finishing up by talking about this. Happiness isn't found in more of me, but only through more of them. And as soon as I put that up there, there's probably at least one or two reactions. Some of us think, Pastor Mike, You know, it's kind of that, oh, I know that. I don't always do it, but I know that. Some of us get it. Some of us, we lose sight of it, but we know that there's something true about, it's not more about me than it's more about them. But there's some of us who read that and think, I don't think so. I don't think so. And here's why we have a natural reaction. If we haven't been in church too long, we don't know how to act like church people. If we really think about it, we live in a world that tells us, no, it really is about me. In fact, I know this because you, at your earliest age, when you're 1-year-olds or 2-year-olds, one of your very first words was, me, mine. And we say it and say it and say it. Anything that doesn't go our way, we say it because we're convinced we know what will make us happy. And if you gave our 2-year-old self everything that we thought that would make us happy, it wouldn't. It'd be awful. It'd be miserable. It'd be miserable for my parents. It'd also be miserable for me, right? Like we think, and by the way, we never outgrow this. We think we know what will make us happy. But left to our own devices, we can be the thief who steals, kills, and destroys, right? We think we know what happiness because Sigmund Freud said it's inside of us, our id, our inner voice that says me, mine, right? We're born that way. But Jesus invites us to live a different way, which isn't about me, it's about them. And I want to look at one of the places that Jesus talks about this. And this was an important lesson that Jesus taught his followers. In fact, 3 of the 4 biographies of Jesus' life includes this teaching in it, sometimes more than once. And this is one of those that I think when you hear, if you've heard this before, you're like, yeah. But imagine if you're listening to it for the very first time. You're just beginning following Jesus. You haven't heard all the Jesus stuff. You don't know the end of the story. You're just listening to him. You're trying to figure out what does this happy, full, abundant life look like. And here's what Jesus says. We're going to read from Mark's biography of Jesus' life. Jesus said, all who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. All who want to save their lives will lose them. And all who lose their lives because of me and because of the good news will save them. What? Like, wait, say that again, Jesus? Anyone who wants to save their life will lose it. That doesn't make any sense, right? I know those of you who've been around church a while, you're like, yeah, it makes sense. But, I mean, outside of following Jesus, that literally doesn't make any sense. And yet Jesus knows something that we know, we just forget. And here's how I know it. So go back to your 9-year-old self or 10-year-old self. It's a beautiful summer evening. You're playing in the backyard, and the sky begins to light up with lightning bugs, right? And what do? You go chase them. And you go chase them, and you get one in your hand, and you open it, and it just sits there, and then it lights up, and you decide, I'm going to get a jar, and I'm going to put it in. Anybody else do this? Put it in the jar, and then you get a couple more. You put them in the jar. You poke holes in the top of the thing, and you have your own little lantern, right? And then mom or dad tells you it's time to get inside, and you set the jar down, and you go inside, and you wake up the next morning, you come out, and you see the jar, and what happened? They're dead. You know, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. We try to keep all these things to ourselves. We try to keep all the things that God gives us, all the things we try to keep, we try to save. And if you want to save your life, if you want to save your stuff, if you want to save your things, what are you going to do? You're going to kill it. And the only way to find life, to receive life, to give life, is by opening up the jar and letting the things go out into creation, right? And I think when Jesus is talking about if you want to save your life, you have to lose it. But if you lose your life for his sake and for the sake of the good news, then you're going to find it. There's two things I think he's talking about here. And these are obvious, but I think important to be reminded of. And the first is, it means saying no to our selfishness. Saying no to our self-centeredness. One of the things that I love getting to do preparing sermons is I just get to Google things. And so I Googled happiness and helping others. I think that's it. And there are just an abundance, like it just goes on and on and on with all these scientific studies, which I love the fact that scientific studies discover what Jesus taught 2,000 years ago. Shocking. And no, but so all these scientific studies come up. One of them said this. This is a mental health foundation from England. It summarized a bunch of scientific studies, and it said, studies have found that acts of kindness, doing kind things for others, are linked to increasing feelings of well-being. Helping others can improve support networks, encourage us to be more active. This, in turn, can improve our self-esteem. There's some evidence to suggest that when we help others, it promotes changes in the brain that are linked to happiness. It creates a sense of belonging, reduces isolation, and helps keep things in perspective. Now, all those are many different scientific studies, which basically say whenever we do less of me and more of them, it makes us happier. We get this, right? We don't always do it, but we get this. So 2 weeks ago, it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I saw Catherine, who directs our Next Gen Ministries in the office. She does a phenomenal job with our young people. I saw Catherine, and she was stressed. I said, hey, Catherine, it seems like something's bothering you. And she goes, well, so we have a Wednesday night happy groups that have been meeting, and a bunch of parents signed up, but we didn't hear about it in time, and so we didn't have enough volunteers for our kids' ministry so they can do groups, and I'm trying to figure out what to do it, because she was teaching confirmation, and we're like, what are we going to do with our kids? I said, well, if you need some help, let me know. And she goes, okay. And I'm like, no, don't you understand the point of empty gestures? And so, and here's the thing. I love kids in small doses. I love kids, but I feel really uncomfortable because I'm not a parent and I always feel awkward and self-conscious and I want to help, but I'm not sure how to help. And so there's a thing going on. I'm like, okay, I'm doing this, right? Lord, if there's a way that you could send somebody else to help and get me out of it, that's fine. I don't mind. But I showed up that Wednesday. I hung out. I played. It wasn't that hard, by the way. And there's two things that happened. One is I felt like I did something meaningful, more meaningful than the other thing that I was going to do on Wednesday night, which is stay at home and catch up on all the backlog of Law and Order SVUs, which is also good. Don't get me wrong, but I actually felt like, oh, in a small way, I made a difference. And I think the other thing is I wanted the kids to know that their church, that they're important to us, that they matter. And I want their parents to know that they matter to us. And in a small way, I made just like, I don't want to toot my own horn, I am, but I don't want to. I'm just trying to, like in a small way, I did something ordinary that made a difference. And you know what that did in me? It made me happy. It made me more happy than sitting at home watching more Law and Order SVU, which I still did later that night. But, and I think there's something inside of us that recognizes that when we say no to ourselves, that we actually discover if we want to save our life, we have to lose it. We have to say no to our selfishness in order to say yes to others. And that's the second half, that saying yes to selflessness. It's not only about saying no to me, but saying yes to others. One of the things I've learned over my ministry is that rarely will you experience God working through you inside your comfort zone. Rarely, if you do what you always do, will you see God do something extraordinary in you and through you. It's only whenever I am willing to step outside of my comfort zone. And I see this because what I've learned is the people who are most involved here at church, most serving, not only here in the building, but whether it's our youth or our children, whether it's our missions, whether it's a backpack program, our school partnerships, or Habitat, or I'm looking around to some of you, I'm like, oh yeah, you do this. Some of you help in the office. Whenever you serve more, you see more, right? We get this because you see what I call ordinary miracles. Here's what I mean by ordinary miracles. They're me offering to help out in a way that seems maybe a little inconvenient, but not spectacular. And I feel like it's ordinary. But to the other people who are praying that God would do this, like a kid needing food on the weekends and praying to God, send me food on the weekends. And you're just like, I'm just packing backpacks for kids in our community. It feels ordinary to us, but to them, it feels like a miracle, right? That's what I call ordinary miracles. And we don't experience ordinary miracles inside our bubble, but only whenever we say no to our selfishness and say yes to our selflessness. So Monday, I got to go with Pam, who's one of our co-directors of missions, who works with our school partnerships. One of the principals called and wanted to meet with Pam and me, and it was the principal, the two assistant principals, and the PTO president, which a part of me, whenever I hear the principal wants to meet with me, I still get nervous, still this day. What did I do? I think I got okay grades, right? So we walked in, just a lovely conversation. We were dreaming about what we are doing and what we can do, what we want to do. We have some really cool things. We partner with 3 schools, 2 elementary schools, middle school, and we're gonna start another elementary school, maybe 2 more. So I think we may be up to 5 in the next couple months. It's super cool. But what I remember the most was a principal at one point said, Mike, I've been in education now for over 25 years, 3 different school districts. I've seen a lot of different religious groups. But he said, I don't understand it. But what you did this Christmas was amazing. He just said it. He said, I've never experienced anything like what you all did for our students, for our staff, for our teachers this Christmas. I can't describe it. He said, I've seen a lot of religious groups. There's something different about you. You're the real deal. And I don't know if you experienced this, but in that moment, I started getting goosebumps. I talked to Pam afterwards. Did you get goosebumps? She's like, yeah. And to us, it feels ordinary. To him, it felt extraordinary. And the only reason I got to be a part of that conversation is because I'm your pastor, yes, but it's also because I've given my life to step outside of my comfort zone to help others in what seems inconvenient to me, but seems extraordinary to them. What about you? If you want to save your life, you can lose it. Let's go back to Mark, what Jesus said. All who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me and because of the good news will save them. Why would people gain the whole world but lose their lives? Think about that if you're first time you heard this. Why would people, of course we wouldn't. What will people give in exchange for their life? Of course, whenever I hear that verse, I think of like The Devil Went Down to Georgia, the song, like I wouldn't trade my soul for anything, would I? Then why is it that we work so hard, so long to just get a bigger house or nicer stuff, all the while we kill our relationships with our spouse or with our children? Why is it that we chase after promotions and advancement and doing more and stretching ourselves thinner to have more stress that we have to compensate with either medicine or unhealthy habits because of our stress? Why is it that we work harder and harder to store up more and more stuff, so much stuff that we can't afford to put our car in the garage because our garage is filled with stuff and we have 2 other storage units to store all the stuff that we don't have space in our house for? Would we exchange life for stuff? No. Well, do we? Maybe. We live in a world that tells us me, mine, keep, get. But Jesus says something counterintuitive, and that's happiness is less of me and more of them. I want to challenge you or invite you to think about what are you trying to keep and what are you trying to save? And I'm sure there's all sorts of things you can do. I hope you'll wrestle with that question. One of the things I know is my mom was a school teacher, and I remember school. Whenever the teacher comes in and gives one of those, you all should be doing different type things, it's always the good students who take it the most personally. And so there's some of you who are doing so many extraordinary things. I would just want to celebrate you. And so if you're doing a lot, don't hear this as do more. But there's some of us who are here and some of us who are worshiping online that if we're really honest, we have some margin that God wants us to do something, and we've been sitting at home watching lots and lots of Law and Order or whatever your show is. And I want to encourage you to pray, God, what ordinary thing do you want me to do that might be a miracle to somebody else? Talk about it with your friends or family. Talk about it with people at church. Talk about it with our staff, with our pastors. By the way, if you talk about it with me, I'll give you lots of stuff you could think about doing. Surprise. If you haven't downloaded the app, download the Church of the Shepherd app. And at the very bottom, there's a button called Serve. I just looked through it. You can serve in next generation ministry, helping with our young people, help with our school partnerships, backpack deliveries, food bank, community services. Those are our worship services at our residential communities. Our office volunteers, extending, there's a bunch of ways you can get involved. Maybe there's something that isn't on the list, but God's nudging you, inviting you, encouraging you to try. But one of the things I'm convinced is that whenever I serve, whenever I give, whenever I step outside of my bubble, I find life, I find purpose, I find significance, I find something that actually matters and makes a difference, that transcends whatever's on TV. And I see God working in me in ways that I don't experience inside my bubble. And Jesus said, whenever we help people who are hungry or thirsty or in prison or need clothes, or you know who we help? not only them, but we actually help Jesus. Because Jesus said, when you do it to them, you do it for me. And that's the happy life. Amen? Let me pray. Thank you, God, for showing us a way that I think we know intuitively, and yet we don't always live. Because we're selfish, and we're sinful, and we're self-centered. And there's moments where we experience selflessness, and we experience you helping us live the way you created us to live. But sometimes for some of us, it's been too long. It's been a while. We haven't been listening to your nudges. We haven't been listening to your voice. Give us the courage. Give us the clarity to step outside and to see you working in us and through us to be an answer to somebody else's prayer. Not only for them, but for us, that we would live and discover the life that you created us for. Amen?